Welcome to the Indie Film Hustle Podcast, episode number 160. Spielberg gave us 3 takes before saying anything to us. Since then, I do just that. 3 takes to let the actors find their rhythm. Edward Burns.
Broadcasting from the back alley in Hollywood, it's the Indie Film Hustle Podcast, where we show you how to survive and thrive as an indie filmmaker in the jungles of the film biz. And here's your host, Alex Ferrari.
Welcome, my Indie Film Hustlers, to another episode of the Indie Film Hustle Podcast. I am your humble host, Alex Ferrari. Today's show is sponsored by Film Convert. Film Convert I used heavily on creating the cinematic look I got on my film, This Is Meg. It helps you give your digital video footage a beautiful cinematic look of film instantly. Whether you're shooting on a GoPro, a DSLR, a Red, an Alexa, a Black Magic, it doesn't matter. Film Convert has created specific camera profiles for almost every camera on the planet so it can adjust to your footage. Film Convert gives you the power to create amazing looking cinematic images with just a couple clicks. And of course, because you guys are part of the Indie Film Hustle tribe, you get 10% off Film Convert by using the coupon code HUSTLE. But you can try this software for free, guys. Just head over to indiefilmhustle.com/film convert. That's indiefilmhustle.com/film, CONVERT. Today's show is also sponsored by Masterclass. And if you guys are looking for really great online courses taught by literally masters, you got to check out Masterclass. If you head over to indiefilmhustle.com/masterclass, it'll take you directly to classes like Werner Herzog, Aaron Sorkin, David Mamet, Steve Martin, Shonda Rhimes, Dustin Hoffman, and Kevin Spacey teaching acting. It's crazy. I've taken all of the courses I just talked about, and I've learned a ton from these masters. So head over to indiefilmhustle.com/masterclass. Now, today's show, guys, I wanted to talk about a guy that you guys probably know about. His name is Edward Burns. He's a very famous actor and a director. He's one of those kind of legendary guys from the 90s who had one of those mythical stories of a guy winning Sundance and going off to this amazing career. And the movie he made was The Brothers McMullen. Now, if you guys have not seen The Brothers McMullen, you definitely got to check it out. I'll leave links to every movie that I'm going to talk about and everything that I'm going to talk about in the show notes at indiefilmhustle.com/160. So I wanted to get that out of the way so I could just talk shop here. So Ed Burns made this movie called The Brothers McMullen. He made it for about $28,000. Now, back in 1995, that was the equivalent of Kevin Smith making his Clerks movie for $23,000, and Robert Rodriguez making El Mariachi for $7,000, and so on. So it was the thing. He shot it all on film, and he was working as a PA for Entertainment Tonight. And the story goes that he actually made this movie. He borrowed money from his family, his friends, and got the $28,000, shot with film, shot with short ends. He would edit his film on beta tape after hours at Entertainment Tonight, and he was just, killing himself for about 8 months. Then one day, he was on a crew that was interviewing Robert Redford. So he literally brought a copy of his movie that he had cut at that point, had a VHS copy of it, and literally ran up to Robert after the interview in the elevator and said, "Mr. Redford, here's my movie. I really want you to see it." Robert Redford said, "Thank you very much." He handed it to his assistant. The doors closed, and he said, "Well, nothing will ever happen from that." Now, a few weeks later, he gets a call from Greg Gilmore, who was the Sundance program director. And he asked him, "Hey, is your movie done?" And he's like, "Oh, yes, it is. Of course." He goes, "Well, we'd like to see a final version of this." And one thing led to another. They got into the festival. And that kind of started getting things crazy because back then, getting into Sundance, it was a much bigger deal than it is now. Don't get me wrong. Getting into Sundance today is still a big deal, but the buying frenzies and things like that were not the same as they are now. They were just insane back then. People were getting deals left and right just because you were in Sundance. So he thought he was very happy to be there, and he got it sold to Fox Searchlight, which was just starting out. It was a little company at the time, a little indie company that was owned by 20th Century Fox, and Brothers McMullen was going to be the first release. He never thought in a million years that he would actually win Sundance, but he did. He won Best Picture that year, and he went crazy. And the rest of his career was launched. He went on to make, I think, $12 million, $13 million on Brothers McMullen for the first release. Then he got a big studio movie, which was, I think, about another $15 million at the time, with little unknown people like Cameron Diaz and Jennifer Aniston, and an amazing cast. And he kind of went on to do very well as not only a director, but also as an actor. He was in Saving Private Ryan and so on. Now, I'm sure you're asking yourselves, Alex, why are you talking about this guy right now? What's so, like, that's great. I don't have 28 grand and it's not 1995. So why are you talking about what's the big deal? I'm like, well, the one thing that Edward Burns has been doing over the course of the last decade is he still has been making these small indie movies. And as technology has changed, so has he. His movies have been ranging anywhere from 25 grand all the way down to 9 grand, which he made a movie called Newlyweds for 9 grand, shot it in 11 days. And he shot it on a Canon 5D, and he had a 3-man crew. Now, I've since then, since kind of falling back into the Edward Burns world, I've gone back and rewatched a ton of his independent movies, and his DVDs are just plumb filled to the brim with indie film nuggets of gold, knowledge bombs in his director commentary. He is so open, so free with the information that he gives you, because he really truly wants to help you as a filmmaker. And they're amazing, and they're dirt cheap. I mean dirt cheap, guys. Talking about 2 cents plus shipping on Amazon, dirt cheap. And he also wrote a book called Independent Ed, which chronicles all of these movies and how he made each movie, the struggles he had with each of these movies over the last decade, all the way from Brothers McMullen all the way currently, I think it was to 2013, 2014, when he was making Fitzgerald's Family Christmas, which was his last big indie that he did before he did a show on TNT. And I did read that book, and it is mandatory reading for anybody in the indie film hustle tribe. This book has to be read by everyone listening to my voice right now. It is a game changer kind of book. Same goes for Rebel Without a Crew, Robert Rodriguez's book, and a couple other books. And I'm actually going to start doing some more book stuff, because I think books have been such an important part of my growth as a filmmaker and as a person, that I think I'm going to start highlighting books going forward in the months and hopefully years to come. But this book is accompanied with multiple films that you can watch, with multiple commentaries. And he has, in his book, he goes over the McMullen 2.0, which are the rules that he basically follows to make an independent film, and a truly independent film. Now, mind you, you're saying, oh, but he's a big actor now. And he's like, he might be a big actor, man, but you know what? People don't want to give, people, it's still hard to get a couple $1 million to make a movie, even with an Ed Burns attached, especially the kind of movies he wants to make, which are smaller movies that are not like big action movies or genre movies. He's figuring out a way to do it himself. So the rules of the McMullen 2.0 are very simple. Actors would have to work for virtually nothing, pretty much scale, which is about $1.25 now for a SAG ultra low budget contract. The film should take no longer than 12 days to film. Do not shoot any more than with a 3-man crew. Actors use their own clothes, so there's no wardrobe. Actors do their own hair and makeup. You beg, borrow, and steal every location you can get your hands on. And one of the tips that Ed talks about in his book, and I've done this as well, and it does work, is you promise the owner of the restaurant or the supermarket or whatever, you give them a big establishing shot in the movie, and you promise them that you will have their name of their restaurant in the movie in a big establishing shot. And a lot of times that does work. And finally, use every resource that you have at your disposal. I was talking to a filmmaker the other day who wanted to make a certain kind of movie. And I said, well, wait a minute, before you go down this road that you have really no resources in, what do you do? And he said, he was like, oh, I'm a tattoo artist. And I said, well, why don't you make a movie about that? You know that world very well. You have access to things like a tattoo shop and resources in that world that I don't have access to. If I was going to start doing a movie about tattooing, it'd cost me a lot more than it would cost him. So I said, also, by the way, you know that market very well, don't you? He goes, yeah, I do. I know tattooing very well. I know the customers who, my customers and the world of tattooing, the subculture of tattooing. I'm like, well, wouldn't it be easier to sell a movie to that culture, to that subculture, to that audience? Because you know that audience. You have connections in that audience. You can spread the word in that audience so much easier than you could trying to make a generic horror movie or a romantic comedy. And he's like, my God, you're right. So he took his resources and he was going to take his resources that he has, write something around those resources, and then sell it to that audience, which is like the bonus on top of it all. Robert Rodriguez, and I've said this a million times on the show, he said, I have a Mexican town. I've got a police department that will let me borrow their guns. I've got a guitar case. I got a pit bull and a turtle. And let's go make a movie. And that's basically what he did with El Mariachi. It's not brain surgery, but you've just got to have the balls to go out there and do it. So when I went out and made Meg, I did the exact same thing. I was like, we shot the movie in 8 days. What are our resources? I'm like, well, Jill had access to amazing talent that we can bring into the project. Great. I have all my posts. I have all my camera gear. I have locations. I'll use my house, my edit suite, so it has production value. I'll shoot that scene in the back room over there. Then we'll shoot at your house. Then we'll shoot at your friend's mansion's house. Then we'll go over here. Then we'll go hike up to the Hollywood sign, and we'll shoot a scene up there and all of this stuff. And we wrote the whole script around what we had access to. And we did it pretty close to a 3-man crew. I think at the most heaviest day, we had a four-person crew, meaning, me, Austin, which was my camera gaffer, and second camera and gaffer, and the sound guy / grip. And that's basically the core team, and myself as the first camera. And that was basically it. And then Jill did craft services with me, and she did the slate. And then occasionally we had a PA. Once in a blue moon, we had somebody just kind of moving things around as a second body. But generally we did that 3-man crew. And it is possible to do. And when I release This Is Meg, you'll see what we were able to do in 8 days. Not saying it's the greatest movie of all time. Not saying it's going to blow anybody out of the water or change the industry by any stretch. But we got something done. We made a good movie, at least a movie that I enjoy, and we're putting it out there. And guess what? I made a feature film. I finally could put that on my resume, that I've made a feature film that I'm proud of. And that's all we could hope to do. And if one person out there likes it, which I know one person that's not my mom liked it out there already, who has seen it from the festival experience, that's great. You know what? And like I've said before, I have no attachments to what happens with Meg. But to go back to what Ed was talking about, is these rules, this McMullen 2.0 is a blueprint to go out and make a movie. Case in point, Jim DeFlacco, who is a Tribe member and made his first feature film, Long Island Love Story, and used everything that Edward Burns said in his book to make his movie. He shot his movie for $6,000. It's an 82-minute movie, and he shot it in 11 days. And he did exactly what Ed did with a lot of his movies. And I'll put a link to the article that he wrote on how he made that movie in the show notes. Once again, the show notes, indiefilmhustle.com/160. At the end of the day, guys, is I can talk to you guys about making movies all day long. I can give you advice on how to go out and, you could do this or you could do that, and you can save money here, and you can get this deal there, and you can get actors doing this way, you could write that script doing that way. I can talk about that all day for the rest of my life. The bottom line is you've got to get up off your ass and go make your movie. Go make your series. Go make something, for God's sakes, and stop waiting around. It's not about tomorrow. It's about now. Stop listening to that little voice inside of you that's always kind of negotiating with you. Like, well, maybe next week we'll work on that script, or maybe next week we'll go out and start looking into cameras or going to find actors, or developing that, or doing that. Maybe next week, not right now, because you got this, or this. And if you think you got excuses, my life's too tough, I've got kids, I've got this. Leo Tolstoy, who wrote War and Peace, had 13 kids. Stephen King wrote Carrie on a typewriter that he held on his lap while working a night job at a laundromat. If there is a will, there is a way. I don't want to hear any effing excuses. All right? You've got to get up and go do it. And if you can make $1,000 movie, like Mark Duplass says, then make $1,000 movie. If you can make a $9,000 movie, like Ed Burns did, then do it. When you're done listening to this episode, guys, definitely go to the show notes. And there's a huge article about Brothers McMullen, how it was made, and also Ed Burns and how he develops and does his work as well. Plus a ton of interviews and videos and tips that Edward gives you that are all in that post. So thank you guys for listening so much. As I said before, we are going to be releasing Meg. This is Meg in August. I'm hoping in the first week of August. I'm not sure just yet. We just got to get confirmation back from iTunes. Once it comes out, you're going to get sick of hearing about it until it gets released, because we're going to try to do something very, very interesting with This Is Meg. We're going to try to break iTunes. And I'm going to talk more about how I'm going to do that in the future. And also, I have a really special episode coming up of the podcast that has something to do with what stops us from being creative and what stops us from moving forward. And it was a book that I read that I won't talk about just yet because I want to save it for the podcast. But it's a book that kind of has changed my life and has changed the way I look at everything that I do. But keep an eye out for that, because I am going to be doing a special podcast in the next couple weeks. And I got a bunch of really cool interviews coming up as well. So if you like this episode or you like the show in general, please head over to filmmakingpodcast.com and leave us an honest review. It really helps the show out a lot. And please don't forget to spread the word, man. Spread the word about the show, about the website. I want as much of this information to get out to filmmakers who need it as possible. So thank you again so much for your support, and thank you for listening. And as always, keep that hustle going. Keep that dream alive, and I'll talk to you soon.
Thanks for listening to the Indie Film Hustle podcast at indiefilmhustle.com. That's INDIEFILMHUSTLE.com.